Hi guys, Jimmy McIntyre here and welcome to another episode of Challenge Jimmy. I hope you're all keeping safe and well and enjoying some of the videos I've been uploading. If you are, feel free to like, share or leave a comment. I just want to say a quick thank you to all of those who've downloaded my book Cracked Lenses. It actually got to #1 in Amazon's free download chart for its genre, both on amazon.com and .co.uk. So I'm really pleased about that, and a special thanks to those of you who left positive reviews on the book. It really makes my day to see those. And if you'd like to download the book, you can see the links in the description of this video where you can pick up a copy yourself. Now, if you're new to the Challenge Jimmy series, basically you, the subscriber, can send me your raw files and I'll process them. To take part, you can send the images to the email address popping up on the screen right now, or you can see that same email address in the description of this video. So I'm looking for your best raw files. If you've got some fantastic images that you'd like to see processed alternatively, so a different way of doing it than you normally would, then by all means send me those raw files and I'll be happy to take a look. Today's fantastic image comes from Michael Bottari, and I have to say this is one of my favorite photos sent in. It's absolutely gorgeous. The composition's simple but really effective. The subjects are really interesting. We've got a great foreground, a fantastic background. We've got this mist above the trees. So I think when processing, we can just do a very simple job here. And even if Michael decided to just publish this straight out the camera as it is right now, I think that would be fine too, because it's such a gorgeous photo. But nevertheless, Michael sent me a single raw file to work with. So I'm going to show you how we can exposure blend with luminosity masks with a single image. And I have covered this before, but this is the first time I've done it with a landscape photo. And you'll see it's really simple. So this is the base exposure we're going to work with, and this is the final image after exposure blending and doing a few contrast adjustments. So we recover the overexposed sky at the top there and some shadows in the foreground, and we create a soft vignette. Really simple, just a few steps, but very, very effective. So let's begin with the tutorial. And here's our raw file. Now, you may be tempted to bring down the highlights or bring up the shadows to try and get the image you're looking for. And for the most part, that can work if your raw file can deal with that sort of movement in the sliders. Often we'll see a lot of image degradation, but the technique I'm going to show you is called double processing or triple processing. Not only does it create cleaner results, it actually gives us greater control because we're going to separate the shadows, highlights, and the rest of the image on 3 different layers. And a lot of the times when we're exposure blending, we can make changes after exposure blending to each individual layer so that we can affect changes in that particular area. So let's say we wanted to just increase the warmth in the highlights. Well, if I do that right now, you see we're affecting all of the image. But if I can split up the sky and put it just in one exposure, then I can make targeted adjustments just to the sky, just on that one layer. Now, as it is, I'm not going to do that here. I just wanted to explain one of the benefits of double or triple processing. But the other benefit is that let's say we want to bring down this slider. That's the highlight slider, and we want to recover the highlights here in the sky where the clouds are. And you can see there's a limited range that we can pull back in the highlights. And we can bring back some whites as well, but that can often flatten the contrast in the brightest parts of the image. Now, what if we want to bring back more of that sky? Well, yeah, we can bring down exposure, and you can see we've got some really cool textures in the sky. However, the rest of the image has gone dark. So now we have to bring up the shadows, and you see it's starting to get a little bit messy. The more we pull those sliders, the more image degradation we're going to get. And we could possibly get something like edging along this mountainside. Right now, I think it looks fine, but that is a possibility the more we bring those sliders up and down. So with double or triple processing, to start with, we have to hold down Shift and open objects, which is what I normally do even when I'm working with multiple exposures. Next, with our base exposure, we right click and we choose New Smart Object via Copy. And I'm going to call that Bright. Then with the bright one, we right click again and choose New Smart Object via Copy again. And I'm going to call this Dark. Now, the reason why we're not just pressing Command and J or Control and J and duplicating the layer is because that duplicates the smart object. But if we go back into Adobe Camera Raw and make any changes, those changes will filter down to all of these layers because they're connected. But if you choose New Smart Object via Copy, that will create a completely new distinct layer. So with these layers now created, on the dark layer on top, I'm going to double click on this thumbnail of the layer. And you see we bring up Adobe Camera Raw again. Now I'm going to reduce the exposure, let's say to minus 0.65, just to restore some of the sky in general. Then I can bring the highlights down until we've recovered enough of the clouds. And I think that is pretty good. With that done, I can press OK. So you see we now have a darker exposure on top, which exposes for the sky. For the brighter exposure, we're going to double click on the thumbnail there, and I'm going to bring up the shadows quite a bit. Let's say the exposure a little bit too. In fact, let's bring up the shadows a lot. What I'm looking at is bringing out these areas here. You see in the foreground? Now, in reality, I'm going to press OK here. I don't think we need to recover those areas in the base exposure. You see, yeah, they are dark. We can brighten them a little bit with a curve layer, but they're not strong shadows, so it doesn't really matter too much. But I'm going to show you how to do it anyway for good practice. So I'm going to put the bright exposure on top here. And now I'm going to blend these exposures. So I select the dark layer. Now guys, you might notice I've got Raya Pro 5 here, which hasn't been released yet. That's going to be released around the 20th of next month. So that's the 20th of May. And of course, that's free to all Raya Pro users. Remember, if you pay for the panel once, you get free updates for the life of the software. So I'll send you an email out around that time next month where you can download Raya Pro 5. And of course, with that email, you'll see all the updates that are included in Raya Pro 5. So I'm going to open Instamask. Now I'm going to show you how to do this with or without Raya Pro 5. So you don't need Raya Pro to follow this tutorial. Now, I'm going to blend in the darker exposure, so I want to recover the sky, so I'm going to go for a brights mask. And you see much of the sky is included in that mask and some of the mountain. It's a very general mask. So I'm going to make it a tiny bit more contrasting just to exclude some of the midtones and shadows. And if I'm happy, I can choose the dark layer and just press apply. And there we go. There's before and after. So we've blended the darker exposure into the base exposure, and we've recovered the clouds in the background and the sky in the mountain as well, and the fog. And now for the bright exposure, to restore the shadows, I'm going to choose this brighter exposure. I'm going to make it invisible. I'm going to go for, let's say, something like a darks 5 or darks 3, my mistake. So we're just looking to select the darkest parts of the image. So I'm going to actually go to a darks 4. And I'm going to bring up the highlight slider a little bit just to make that selection a little bit stronger. And then I'm going to press select white. And you see that's made the brighter exposure invisible. With a white brush, I can now paint in these shadows. And look at the way we are staying within the selection. We're not painting in any of the water. We're just painting in the darkest parts of the image. Now I'm going to undo that last change on that rock, and I'm going to put my brush opacity at around 40%. I don't want the change to be too strong here. And just a little bit down there. Maybe this corner here. Then when I'm done, I can press Command and D or Control and D to deselect the active selection. And there's before and after. You see, we've just very subtly recovered some of those darker areas. And if you think that's a little bit too strong, you can always bring down your opacity of the brighter exposure or the darker exposure as well. And the reason why I used apply with this darker exposure is because I wanted to apply the whole mask to that layer. But in the brighter exposure, I pressed select and I manually brushed in the shadows because I only wanted to affect a couple of very choice areas. I didn't want to apply the mask to the entire image because it would have affected the trees as well. So with that done, I'm going to show you how to do this without Raya Pro. So let me just delete these masks. Then I'm going to make the brighter exposure invisible and the darker exposure invisible too. I'm going to create a mask on the darker exposure, have that mask selected, go to Image, Apply Image, and you can use the same settings as mine. Press OK. Then you can hold down Alt or Option on a Mac, left click on the mask, and if you want to make this a more contrasting mask, you can hold down Control and L or Command and L. Like you can bring the midtones along a little bit. So we're affecting more of the highlights and less of the midtones and shadows. So there's the final blend. Then with the brighter exposure, we're going to create a black mask on that brighter exposure. So I'm going to hold down Alt or Option on a Mac, make that brighter exposure visible, but it still won't be visible on the big screen here because we've got a black mask. Then I'm going to make sure I've got my brush opacity at 100%. I'm going to create a curves layer with the mask of the curves layer selected, I'm going to go to Image, Apply Image, and this time I'm going to press Invert and press OK. Again, I'm going to hold down Alt or Option on a Mac and left click on the curves layer, and I'm going to hold down Control and L or Command and L just as we did before. But we want to create a really contrasting mask which is selecting only the darkest parts of the image. So I'm bringing this mid-tone slider right down and the highlight slider up a little bit. And then if I'm happy, I can press OK. Then I can hold down Control or Command on a Mac and left click on that mask, and you see we've got some marching ants now. Then I select the mask of the brighter exposure, hold down Control and H or Command and H to hide the marching ants. With a white brush selected, I then begin painting in those darker areas, and we can bring up the opacity of that brighter exposure. I lower my brush opacity to 40% just to do some areas here. And also in this corner here. And then I press Control and D or Command and D to deselect the active selection. And of course I can delete this curves layer. So this is before and after. We've recovered the shadows and the highlights. And just as before, I am going to bring down the opacity of that brighter exposure. So now in terms of post-processing, I really don't think we need to do much here. I'm going to open a levels layer. Make sure we've got an image which is relatively bright because I don't think this needs to be super dark. Then I'm going to mask out the highlights there in the sky because they've become a little bit overexposed and the sky doesn't need to be bright. So there's before and after. You see we've given the foreground especially just a little bit more contrast, a little bit more life. Then I'm going to do my usual contrast adjustment where I create a levels layer and just drop the midtones a tiny bit. Bring up the output level. I just like to soften some of those shadows. This is a matter of personal taste, obviously. If you don't like doing that, it's absolutely fine. But I personally really enjoy it. Especially with a scene like this where you've got mist in the background. So it already creates a really soft feel. And I think soft contrast suits that kind of scene. But I would say that we could probably brighten up the foreground a little bit again as well. So let's just say we'll create another levels layer. And again, paint out any overexposed areas in the sky. So let's look at these three contrast adjustments. I think they've given the image a little bit of mood and a little bit of energy. And that's almost it. To finish, I would do my usual manual vignette. And for Raya Pro 5, I've added a new function which actually has that for us in the Filters and Finish tab called Man Vignette or Manual Vignette. And that creates two layers with black masks, so we just need a white brush, and the dark layer will create our vignette. So you see we're darkening around the outside of the image. And the top layer called Bright will allow us to shift the focus of light in our scene. And of course, I think that's a little bit strong, so I'm going to select the group here and change the opacity of that layer to, let's say, around 70. So there's before and after. Now, if you don't know how to do this manual vignette, I have it pretty much demonstrated in most of my videos, but I recently did a video called Ask Jimmy, the Power of Vignettes. So if you pop onto my YouTube channel, you'll see that and an explanation of why it's such a great way to shift the balance of light in your photos. So in this particular example, we have a really open scene. The sky is bright, the foreground's bright. But where we want to push the viewer is, I would say, directly in front of us. So we've got this tree and rock here, this tree here on this little island, and then we've got these beautiful trees in the background and the mist around it. So I want to push the viewer to the center part of the image, and that's why I've brightened that area up. You see? And so here is before and after. This is the image we started with, and this is the image we finished with. We recovered the highlights and the shadows and created quite a balanced scene. Now looking at that, I would probably add a little bit more contrast in the shadows there. Just a tiny bit. I don't want it to be too strong. Let's have a look. Yeah, I think that looks a little bit better. I think the contrast was probably a little bit soft to finish. And so that's it. As always, I hope you found this useful. Thank you very much for watching.